Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the presentation today. It's called Owning My Sexual Behavior by Travis Breeden. And we're going to talk about autism and ABA therapy. So here we go. We're going to dive right in and we're going to get started. So a little bit about myself is I am 37 years old. I was diagnosed with the Asperger's syndrome at the age of 22. And I have been trying to figure out relationships and friendships ever since then, if not before then, so I could try and make friends and get a girlfriend, have relationships, get married, have kids, all of the above. I've really been trying to figure out those things that were going on. I was looking for supports growing up and as an adult since the age of 22 when I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. I was looking for help, and I just had a hard time finding support for an adult on the autism spectrum, right? So one of the reasons why I'm sharing my story is in hopes that we can get some support in place for teenagers and young adults on the autism spectrum, because I think that's very important. I kind of fell in love with applied behavior analysis by accident, actually. I was actually in Indianapolis, Indiana. I had met Carl and Devin Sundberg, who are BCBAs in the field, and they owned a clinic called the Behavior Analysis Center for Autism. And I attended a presentation at that clinic when they had contracted Dr. Peter Gerhardt to come in and give this presentation on puberty and sexuality for young learners with ASD. And I fell in love with ABA by watching that presentation, simply for the fact that Dr. Gerhardt was talking about my life. It seemed like he was basically describing my life within that presentation, which is really cool, right? To find someone that you connect with and can get you and things like that. So I remember I spent years after that presentation trying to connect with Dr. Gerhardt and trying to get Dr. Gerhardt and the Sundbergs to be able to dive right in and help me with sexuality and puberty. And it was just a complicated situation because they were not able to provide that help because they were not, one, I was in Indiana and Dr. Gerhardt was in New Jersey. So it'd be hard for him to provide that support for me. And two, there was just no funding source for me to be able to get that help to pay Dr. Gerhardt or to pay the Sundbergs to have them help me with sexuality and puberty and things like that. And so it really took a toll on me. And I actually ended up being I had some very poor and negative behaviors towards the Sundbergs and towards Dr. Gerhardt because I was upset that they couldn't work with me and help me with social skills and ABA therapy and things like that. And so I struggled for a long time. I verbally attacked a lot of people, said a lot of bad things about people because they weren't helping me. And I was frustrated with the fact that no one was helping me. And so what had happened for me was that I had gotten into, here's the scenario. I went to Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'd seen this presentation by Dr. Gerhardt. And I related to a lot of it, so I had a lot of questions about what he was saying. He talked a lot about social context, step 1 to step 787. Hi, how are you? My name is Travis. Can I touch you? And so I had a lot of questions. And I wasn't finding any help. My counselor, obviously, counselors aren't necessarily trained in social behavior, right? So here I was going to my counselor looking for some support with the sexual behaviors and that type of thing. And I wasn't finding it there. I had some support through the state of Indiana autism services. But again, I just had when you work with let's compare the two here. We've got Dr. Peter Gerhardt with over 20 or 30 years of experience in behavior analysis talking about autism and sexual behavior. And then here I was working with a 19-year-old DSP who had no qualifications and no training and was trying to help me with sexual behavior. And it just wasn't adding up. It wasn't working for me. It didn't work. It actually made things worse because it just frustrated me more because I would try and talk about social context and social thinking and sexual behavior and things like that. I would try and talk about that with my 19-year-old DSP, and not only were they uncomfortable talking about it, but it was just way over their head, right? So it was above their level and their expertise and above their pay grade, basically, so to speak. And so that's how I fell in love with ABA therapy. I had watched Peter Gerhardt present and taken that to heart and just really fell in love with his presentation. So I started watching him. I followed him on YouTube. I would watch all of his presentations and stuff like that. and just really I can memorize. Like I can tell you a Peter Gerhardt presentation. I can recite it word for word because he became my special interest. I would watch his videos on YouTube about 40 to 50, 60 hours a week, just studying him. And but I didn't have anyone to study him with. I didn't have a BCBA or someone specializing in sexual behavior to go through and talk about what Peter was talking about with me. And that was kind of challenging for me because I just struggled to navigate what he was saying, and I was confused, and I interpreted some things wrongly, and that caused some negative sexual behaviors, which really affected not just myself, but a lot of the people that that I was interacting with socially and things like that. So, there's a few Peter Gerhardt stories we're going to talk about today throughout the presentation, but one of the things I really want to focus on is how we're talking about black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking, and step 1 and step 787. So Peter Gerhardt often talks about step 1, hi, how are you? To step 787, can I touch your breast? He will explain this in his presentation. Now, granted, let's be clear up front. The number 787 is just a number that Peter throws out. Okay, so it's not necessarily the fact that there are 787 steps to building a social or romantic relationship, but that's just a number he throws out. I've seen him throw out 787. I've seen him use 200 before. I've seen him use different numbers in all of his talks and all of his presentations, which is really cool. But I took it very literal because I'm a literal thinker. So in hearing Dr. Gerhardt present for the first time, when he said there are 787 steps, that stuck with me, and I became obsessed with 787 steps. So that's kind of my introduction today. That's a little bit about me and how I fell in love with ABA therapy. And now we're going to dive into some of the content of this presentation, okay? So we talked a little bit about black and white thinking and autism, all or nothing thinking. So for me, I tend to think, like I said, in a very all or nothing way. So it's like, my first step is going to be, hi, how are you? And my second step is going to be, can we make out? Or can we go on a date? And things like that. And so I struggle with gray concepts. And the problem with that is, from step 1 to step 787, there's 786 steps in between there. Between, hi, how are you? My name is Travis. So can I touch your breast? And it doesn't get to that point that quickly. You have to go through all those steps. And if you don't go through the steps, you're not going to build a good social relationship. You're not going to have a chance at building a romantic relationship because people are going to turn you away and think that you're weird and creepy and all of the above. So it's very important that we understand all or nothing thinking with autism. So what would happen is, because I didn't have any gray areas of thought, I would skip straight to sexual behavior because it was like, okay, here's an acquaintance. I'm interacting with you at an acquaintance level, and I'm hi, how are you? Small talk, right? Hi, how are you? But then I didn't know how to determine how to flirt with her without going to sexual behavior. So it was very confusing for me because to me, flirting means being sexual, and that's not the case at all. Flirting actually means all sorts of things that you do when you interact with someone, but it doesn't mean being sexual at all. You can flirt without being sexual, basically, and that's very important. And so I tend to need to label things right away, as I talk about a lot. I tend to need to label if you're an acquaintance or friend or girlfriend when I first meet someone. And that can be kind of reckless and dangerous because most neurotypical people, when they meet someone, they're not trying to label someone right away and who they are and what kind of relationship they're going to have with them. Most people just live in the moment and build these relationships with each other as time goes on, and then you start to label them after you have the connection. So you can't necessarily label a type of relationship without emotional connection. And I was trying to label the relationships without connecting with the girl and without connecting with someone, and it wasn't working because as soon as I would label the relationship in my head, I would start interacting with them like they were that person. So if I label you as an acquaintance, I would have them labeled as an acquaintance and interact with them as an acquaintance, which would mean all I would ever do with them is say, hi, how are you? I'm Travis. How's your day going? What are you up to today? What did you do yesterday? Those kind of questions were all I would have with someone who was an acquaintance. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, when I met someone who I wanted to be my girlfriend, I would interact with them like they were my girlfriend and talk to them sexually and talk about sexual behavior and all of those things. And there was no middle ground. So there was actually a very gray area. It's what I consider the middle ground. And the grayness of that is just asking them questions about themselves. So I recently was able to find a resource through, actually I found this resource through Match.com. I had a profile on Match.com, and one of the things that was nice about that is it came with a free consultation with one of their dating experts. So I was able to meet with one of their dating experts on the phone and talk to them about like how to send messages to women, how to write a good profile, how to do post good pictures and things like that. And so one of the resources that they gave me was that they gave me a list of 193 questions that you ask someone on a first date or online while you're getting to know them. So now these are questions like, where did you grow up? Do you like savory or sweet foods? What were you like what were you like in high school? What was your most embarrassing moment as a child growing up? Do you have siblings? Are you close to your siblings? And just questions like that help you actually get to know someone. And what I'm finding is those questions are actually gray concepts and gray thinking. And that's very important because that is how you build chemistry and you build connection, by asking those type of questions about someone. You don't build chemistry or connection by skipping those questions and going straight to sexual behavior or sexual questions. So that's very important to realize. In my mind, like I said, it's black and white thinking, all or nothing. So the gray areas just didn't exist. So I was struggling to fill, because most people, you have these social networks, right? So you have this circle of friends, and you have different levels of friendships within that circle of friends. And I was struggling to fill that circle because I would either have acquaintances or I would have girlfriends. And I didn't have close guy friends because with the all or nothing thinking, to me, it meant that I was going to interact with someone either as an acquaintance or I was going to be sexual with them. And obviously I wasn't going to be sexual with guys because I'm a straight heterosexual male. And most guys wouldn't like that when I approached them and tried to be sexual with them anyways. And so I wasn't building friendships with guys because I would just stay at small talk with them and ask them how their day was, but I wasn't getting to know them because I just thought that the next step 2 was sexual. And I wasn't going to be sexual with a guy because I just wasn't interested in guys. That makes sense, right? So I wasn't building friendships with men because I thought step 2 was sexual, and I didn't want to go to step 2 with a man. And at the same time, I wasn't building friendships with girls because, again, I thought, no gray thinking, I thought step 2 was sexual, right? And so I would go to step 2 and try to be sexual with a girl, and I was doing that because obviously I have interest in women sexually. So I was doing that with girls, unlike with guys. But it was actually coming on too strong, and I was talking about sex too soon and pushing the girl away and scaring her away. And so, like I said, there's no gray concepts. And so I basically didn't have any friends, right? Because I had a lot of acquaintances, but I didn't have friends because my step 2 was the end of 10 years down the road in the friendship, right? So step 2 was step 787, but you shouldn't get to step 787 for a few months or a year into the friendship or relationship. But I was trying to get there on day 1, and that wasn't working for me because most people don't operate that way. So that's kind of a little bit about gray thinking, black and white thinking, and how I struggle with understanding gray concepts. And I'll be happy to take some questions on that later in the presentation. I want to talk about mindfulness because lately I've been using mindfulness, and mindfulness has been helping me to be present in the moment. And guys, when you're present in the moment is when you're going to be able to learn social steps and social skills. When you're not present in the moment, it creates a scenario in which it's very difficult for me to learn social skills. And so I was having a hard time getting people to understand what I needed help with. And I had a lot of people, yes, over the years, I've had a ton of people try and help me with social skills in dating and relationships. But because of my black and white thinking, a lot of that help comes in the gray area. So because that's what I needed help with, was gray thinking, to understand how to date and how to have relationships and friendships. However, that became a challenge for me because I wasn't mindful and I wasn't in the present moment. And in order for me to understand gray thinking, because gray thinking is an uncomfortable subject for me, it's hard for me to analyze and process gray thinking. And so I need to be very comfortable in that present moment and be present and have my mind connected to my body in order for me to process what someone's teaching me about gray thinking concepts. So yeah, I definitely use mindfulness to be present in the moment and to analyze and think about gray thinking areas. And I do a lot of deep breathing techniques. I do a lot of like meditation exercises. I've been practicing yoga occasionally, and just all sorts of things like that. So yeah, I can't tell you enough how important mindfulness is. ACT therapy, ACT. We're going to talk about Stephen Hayes a little bit. So ACT therapy is acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a therapy. It's kind of a little bit, for me, it seems like a little bit like mindfulness, but it's very relatable to ABA, because you have to accept and commit to something if you're going to learn. I had to accept and commit to being uncomfortable in the moment so that I could actually ride out that uncomfortability and get comfortable with the gray areas and the gray thinking. So very important to talk about mindfulness, and we can talk more about that if you have questions later, but it's important to be able to be mindful and present in the moment so that you actually can focus on learning social skills in the gray area, because that step 2 through step 787 is all gray. So black and white is only 2 steps, guys. Black and white is very limited in the capacity of social skills, because there's a lot of social skills that happen in the gray area, but only 2 skills happen in the black and white area. The start and the finish is black and white. So we're going to talk a little bit more. We talked a little bit earlier about going from step 1 to step 787. So going from, hi, how are you? My name is Travis, to, can I touch your breast? Basically that started happening for me. That wasn't a natural occurrence for me. That wasn't something that I had taught myself, or that I had just naturally started doing when I was a kid or when I was a teenager. That all started for me when I met Peter Garrett and heard him present on autism and ABA therapy, because that was an example he used as to what not to do. Now, granted, you can sit here and tell me, well, why would you pick up and practice an example that he said what not to do? And I think there's a good explanation for that. And for me, that explanation is simple, because it's simply that I wasn't getting the replacement behavior or the replacement steps in order to get to step 1 to step 787. I just heard him say, this is step 1, this is step 787, and this is what's going on, this is what not to do, but no one was saying what to do. And so when I left that presentation and I got back home and I started trying to apply what Peter said to my life, I thought to myself, well, this might not work, but this is better than nothing. And so in thinking that, I thought this was better than nothing because, one, what is the function of what I was trying to do? I'm going to be honest with you here. I'm not going to lie, sugarcoat anything. I'm not going to lie. There was a time in my life, and it still occasionally happens, where I just want to touch someone's breast. Yeah, I would love to have a connection with someone and love to connect with them and connect with their mind, but I became really desperate for human physical touch, and that's all I cared about and all I wanted to do. And there was a time in my life in which I thought, and I just started to accept the fact that I would never get a girlfriend or never have a relationship, but if I could just get a girl to be friends with benefits, or a girl to let me touch, then I would be very happy and very, very healthy for me. In reality, that would be unhealthy for me, and it's not exactly what I want, right? So, it's very important to continue to understand that how I fell into that trap was by accident. And so, 1, 2, I thought I was being honest with the girl. So I wanted to touch, so I thought, why not tell her that I want to touch? Because that's just being honest, right? You're not telling a white lie, you're being honest with who you are, and you're telling her that you want to touch. So that's extremely important for me for you guys to understand is that I thought I was being bluntly honest with someone. But the problem is I was offending them in that, and I was being disrespectful to them because I didn't take the time to connect with them and form a relationship with them. So basically, I started going from step 1 to step 787. Hi, how are you? My name is Travis. Can I touch you? By accident, because I fell into that trap of this is what Peter Gerhardt explained, and then I didn't have anyone else to talk to about it or anyone else to go through that with me and help me understand what he was saying. And so it became it just fell into place. It was like one of those learned behaviors for me. And that ended up going very poorly for me. And so now I'm really focused in on learning step 2 through step 786. And guys, let me tell you something. It is actually very enjoyable to take time and be in the presence of step 2 through step 786 because you learn a ton about the person. And learning about the girl is fun because you care about them actually. I've always cared about girls, but my anxiety and the skipping steps part of autism made it seem like I did not care about the girl that I was getting to know. And so that made me seem like this weirdo or this creep because it seemed like I was just trying to get in her pants basically, because I wasn't trying to get to know her because I didn't have the steps in place to get to know her. So living in the present moment has allowed me to focus in on learning steps 2 through step 786, asking those important questions of where did you grow up? What were you like in high school? Sweet or savory foods, and just helps me get to know the girl for who she is. And I got to tell you, I'm having more fun with that right now than I am talking about sexual behavior. So it's been a while, not very long. I'm still new to this process. I'm just discovering the fact that I can learn the gray thinking by being in the present moment. So it's been about a month or so that I've really been able to focus in on steps 2 through step 786, and build a relationship with someone without talking about sexual behavior or sexual questions. Now I'm going to be the first to admit to you, I don't have all the steps, guys. So I don't know step 2 through step 786. I'm not there yet. I can't chain the steps, and I doubt that there's any man out here, or any woman out here for that matter, that can tell you that they know how to chain the steps 2 through step 786 themselves. It's just a natural occurrence, and it just naturally happens because social skills are not linear, they're unlinear, so they bounce back and forth and they go back and forth. So you might be at step 1 with someone and get to step 10, and you might have to go back to step 5 the next time you see them. So yeah, that's very important, and that's a little bit about steps 2 through step 786. In the black and white thinking and all or nothing thinking. So now we're going to move in, we're going to talk a little bit more about mindfulness in ABA. So in my opinion, guys, for those of you that are BCBAs and RBTs, mindfulness is a very important soft skill for you to learn, because the client with autism, the client that you're serving and helping, they need to be mindful and present in the moment, like I was telling you, to learn steps 2 through step 786 and learn about social behavior. We have to be mindful and we have to be present to learn about social behavior. And if we're not, we're just not going to learn, and we're definitely not going to generalize and apply the skill. So that's very important. Now, how can we as therapists expect our clients to be mindful and be present in the moment if we ourselves are not mindful and present in the moment? So that's very important. And a soft skill for BCBAs and RBTs is to practice mindfulness and be present in the moment. So what I found is mindfulness for me, like I talked about previously, mindfulness has made it possible for me to be more flexible. When I am present in the moment and mindful, my mind is connected to my body, my brain is more flexible, right? So I can, instead of being just black and white, all or nothing, being mindful allows me to think in gray concepts and gray areas of social interaction. But if I'm not mindful and I'm not present, I don't clear my mind, then I'm just very black and white. When that anxiety is really high and my mind is not clear, it's all or nothing thinking. And that's very unhealthy for me. But yeah, being mindful also releases a lot of anxiety for me. So I do a lot of meditation techniques. I do a lot of act therapy stuff. I do a lot of yoga, and that allows me to be mindful in the present moment. And basically that allows me to release that anxiety. And when that anxiety is released, not only is it easier to be mindful, it's like a chain reaction. But being mindful helps release anxiety, but on the opposite end, being less anxious helps me be mindful. And when I'm mindful and when I'm less anxious is when I learn best. Also, as I talked about a little bit earlier, being mindful kind of helps me generalize and apply in different contexts and different settings. And we'll talk more about generalizing and applying a little bit later. But it's very important to someone with autism, when you're learning a skill, you have to not only learn a skill in a technical way, but you must learn how to generalize and apply that skill in different social contexts and different environments. And so what I found is, being mindful and not stressing out so much about anxiety, not stressing out so much about learning the social skill, but just being mindful and taking it in as someone is teaching it to me, is making it easier for me to generalize and apply that skill in different contexts and different social settings. So that's very important and makes me very happy. So now we're going to move on. We're going to talk about context. So social context is what we're going to talk about. I'm going to quote Peter Gerhardt here. So Peter Gerhardt will always tell you that context is king. Okay? So the technical skill is one thing, but you have to be able to generalize and apply that skill in different contexts and across different contexts and social environments. It's very important. So some examples here of social context. I got a story for you here. One day, well, first of all, I'll explain to you a little bit about my journey with dating and relationships. Because I wasn't getting support from my therapeutically, I was going to the internet to find out how to talk to girls. So one day I go to Google, this was in 2007, I go to Google and I Google how do you get a girlfriend. And so I do that, and all this stuff comes up about pickup artists and being a bad boy and that type of thing. Which, that's a topic for another day, but I want to be careful here. We drive home the point here that we don't want people on the autism spectrum to go to the internet to get information about dating, relationships, and sexuality. We don't want people with autism to find pickup artists, because pickup artists will be very friendly to someone with autism, because they're actually a very rule-driven, rule-governed behavior type of thing. And people with autism are going to love rule-governed behavior because we like written rules. We don't like unwritten rules. We like written rules. And pickup artists will give you all kinds of unwritten rules to use in your social interactions with girls. And so, yeah, long story short, going back into my story now, I had a guy friend. Well, I actually met a guy when I was studying pickup artists. I met a guy at a bar in town in Fort Wayne, Indiana, who was really good at talking to girls. And so I started talking to him, picking his brain a little bit, and he said he would help me if I paid him. So I started paying him money to help me learn how to talk to girls. And one of the things that he was able to do with girls was he would walk up to these girls at the bar and start saying things like, "Hey bitch, what's up?" And I'm quoting him, "Hey bitch, what's up?" He would say that to girls. And they would laugh at him and start talking to him and respond to him. And I was like, what the heck just happened? You just called her a bitch and she's responding to you. And no, there's no real explanation ever given for that, but I just knew that it works for him. And I was frustrated because I was just saying, "How are you? How's your day going?" And girls would be like, "Oh, it's going good, how are you?" But they'd never actually try and get to know me. And so I thought I needed to do something outrageous to get their attention and get them to talk to me and get them to spend time getting to know me. And so I thought, well, "Hey bitch, what's up?" works for my friend here who is talking to girls. Why wouldn't it work for me? And so one day, I walk up to a girl at a bar and I just say, "Hey bitch, what's up?" I'd never met her before, never talked to her before. I just said, "Hey bitch, what's up?" And she ended up getting really upset and really bothered by that. And I didn't understand why, because I was like, well, my friend will do it. My friend does it to girls. Why can't I do it? Or why wouldn't it work for me? But the problem is context is key. So my friend here, turns out, actually had some kind of connection with the girl before he said that. Now, it might have been a connection where he met the girl before and has actually talked to her before, or it could have been just something as simple as he flirted with her non-verbally and had that connection and chemistry with her going, so he was able to walk up to her and say that. I obviously had no connection, no chemistry, and for me to walk up to a girl and say, "Hey, bitch, what's up?" was never going to work. That kind of thing will never work for me because I just don't have that charisma. I don't have that nonverbal communication style to be able to walk up and pull that off. So that's just an example and a story about how context is king, right? Because if we don't understand that other people have different social contexts with other people, with girls, for example, like my friend had different social context with that girl. And if I didn't understand that, and I tried to do the same thing he did, it wasn't going to work for me. So, and that's why context is king. That's an example of a story. That's an example of how misunderstanding and misreading social context can go bad. And that's why being able to generalize and apply is very important, because I should have been able to generalize and apply that what he said to a girl wasn't going to work for me because I didn't know her like he did. So I want to talk about something very important to me. And I want to talk about starting. A lot of times we think when we learn social skills, we need to start at a lower level or an easier skill and work our way up to the harder skills at a higher level. And for me, that has never worked. And I think that's because I have Asperger's and I'm so high functioning. And I hate to use that word because we all know that it's a terrible way to describe someone, but it's hard to define what someone is without using that word at the same time. So because I'm a quote unquote high functioning, for me to start at a low functioning level doesn't make sense to me. And so I've had a lot of DSPs try and work with me, and when they meet me, they would start out with something like, well, let's make sure you know how to, let's go to McDonald's and practice ordering your food at the counter at McDonald's. The problem with that is I've been doing that since I was 5-6 years old. And so it was kind of boring to me, and it was lower level skills than what I was wanting to learn, and it had nothing to do with dating and relationships, right? So they were starting low, and then they wanted to build up higher, which was very negative for me and very harmful for me. Because if we're going to do ABA therapy, we're going to make sure it's person-centered. And you would do an FBA, you do a functional assessment, behavioral assessment, to make sure that we're starting in the right place, right? So if you're a BCBA and you did an FBA with me, you would never say, let's start with practicing ordering your food at McDonald's. You would never say, let's practice going to Walmart and finding things on the shelf at the grocery store, right? Because you would know that I already know how to do that. So that's very important. So for me, it's easier to start at a higher level and then help me generalize and apply down. So a lot of times we start at a low level and we teach people how to generalize and apply up to a higher level. For me, I want to start at that higher level social skill, and then I want to be able to generalize down and apply down in different social settings and contexts at a lower level. And that's really important for me, and that's just my learning style. Not everyone with autism is going to learn that way, but I have just learned that is kind of how I learn and process information and process things that way. And so, yeah, that's very important to do that. But so yeah, when it comes to the social steps in the chain, we talk about step 1 and step 787. How are you? Can I touch you? For me, it doesn't make sense to start at how are you and go up. It makes more sense for me to start, not that I'm gonna go around practicing saying can I touch you, but it would make more sense for me to start at step 786 and work backwards and backward chain than it would make sense for me to start at step 2 and then work my way up to step 786. And I think that's because I think I can probably navigate some of those lower level steps when I'm in the present moment and mindful. I can navigate some of those lower level steps. Being at step 2 to maybe I can get to step 200 on my own. Step 2 to step 200 might be okay, but I can't get from step 780 or 700 to step 786. So what happens is I need to start out at step 786 and chain down to step 2, backward chain down to step 2. So that's really important for me. And then I want to tell you guys a little bit of a story here that I've learned. Peter Garrett also shared this story. So context is king, right? So we talk a lot about context is king. We're going to go from basically this girl, 27-year-old woman, was living in New York City, and she grew up, she's on the spectrum, an intellectual disability possibly. But she grew up with mom and dad telling her she couldn't get pregnant until she gets married. Meaning that mom and dad kind of have that cultural value. The pregnancy shouldn't happen unless you're married. But the girl, for some reason, well, because of context, right? The girl thinks that I can't get pregnant until I get married. So she thinks that scientifically and physically, she's unable to actually physically get pregnant until she gets married. And then she goes out and starts having unprotected sex. She didn't realize that, hey, I should use a condom, or hey, this might happen, I should take birth control. She's having unprotected sex because she thinks she can't scientifically and physically get pregnant. Mom and dad told her she couldn't get pregnant, so why would she be able to get pregnant? And that's just an example of context being king. Is that you gotta, when you're having these conversations with your kid, with your teenager about puberty and sexuality, context is king. You really got to be able to explain that in the right context. So now you've got a girl who's pregnant and having a baby who is upset at her mom and dad because they told her that she couldn't get pregnant until she got married, and she believes them because she loves them, she trusts them, she believes them. And now she's upset at mom and dad. And now we've got all kinds of problems. So that's a little bit about context is king and why context is so important, guys, and something that you should focus in on and really drive home in your therapeutical sessions. Moving on, we're going to talk about extinction. So, stimming, guys. A lot of times ABA gets a bad rep from autistic individuals because they like to think that we like to take away their stimming behaviors. And many adults with autism I talk to think that as ABA therapists, we are trying to change who they are. We're trying to take the autism out of them. And that's simply, I think, because there's been a lot of focus on extinction. And some people are interpreting extinction wrong. So a lot of people think that we're trying to take away their STEM behaviors completely. So if someone's hand flapping, for example, we think, they think that as a BCBA or an RBT, you're there to make them stop hand flapping. And good ABA would never try to make someone stop hand flapping entirely, because we would know that there's a reason for that behavior and there's a reason for that coping skill. And we would just allow that person to practice it in an appropriate setting, an appropriate environment. Now, we would teach them proactive social goals to help them, should we teach them proactive social skills to help them learn how to generalize and apply when it's appropriate to hand flap and when it's not appropriate to hand flap. Yes, we can be proactive and we can teach them social goals. And when we do that, what I find is, for me, when you teach me proactive social goals and you actually help me with learning how to be socially appropriate, it helps me to not need to stim all the time. So the more proactive social behaviors I have, the less need I have for stimming behaviors. And that's really fascinating to me. So rather than target the extinction of hand flapping, I'd rather you target the development of a socially significant behavior, because that socially significant behavior is going to help me stop hand flapping in certain settings and certain environments. Now, there will always be a time where I feel like it's appropriate to hand flap, but there will be times when I'm able to cope through that and get through that anxiety and not do that, because it's really important to understand. It's really important to be able to understand that we don't need to necessarily extinct this stimming behavior all the way. So I want to make sure that as therapists, that yes, let's watch, keep an eye on the stimming behavior and help someone cope with that and get through that. But let's not necessarily target the behavior and take it away, because that behavior is a coping skill for that person. And that behavior is a part of who we are. It's a part of our autism. So taking that away would make me very uncomfortable. So let's increase socially significant behavior to decrease problem behavior, decrease stimming behaviors. Yeah, so like I said, just never try to eliminate it. But also, stim behavior needs to generalize and apply. So for me, it's important for me that when I'm stimming, you understand that I need help knowing how and when to stim and how and when not to stim. So if I'm going to like pick up my wrist, for example, do something stimmy, help me understand when is a good time to do that and when is not a good time to do that. Now, obviously, there are some stim behaviors like self-injurious behavior where there's never going to be a good time to do that. So we do want to kind of extinct that behavior, but we still, even when you're trying to extinct the behavior, it is my opinion that we don't necessarily have to target that behavior. We still need to teach proactive social behavior, even for someone who's stimming. They're stimming because they don't have enough proactive social behaviors. So we need to focus in on teaching proactive social behavior so that we can decrease self-injurious behavior. And that's very important. So yeah, STEM behaviors need to generalize and apply in different settings, in different environments. That's very important. So yeah, what we can see versus what we cannot see. Moving on. We see behavior, but we don't see what we want to see. So we see behaviors, but we don't see what we're trying to teach. So necessarily, we see a lot of problem behavior. What we would label, for some people, label as problem behavior because they're very visible. But what we don't see is the socially significant behavior that we're trying to shape. So, how do you shape something if you don't see it? We don't see. Basically, what I'm trying to say is we don't see what we were trying to shape with our topography. So, how do you observe the invisible? Well, the invisible is always there, guys. So the social behavior is always there. It just might not be the positive, proactive social behavior that we're wanting to see. And so I think it's important to learn for us to practice observing what we can't see. So how do you operationally define something if you can't see it? Well, for me, the answer to that is what is socially significant for another person. So what is socially significant for a neurotypical person? That's how I would operationally define the goal that we're trying to teach. And so not only do we need to operationally define the behaviors that we see in the individual with autism, but we're operationally defining behaviors that we want to see in an individual with autism. And you guys know this, but I just wanted to talk about this and give my perspective on this because it's very important that we operationally, for someone with autism, for me, I need to understand the operational definition of what you're trying to teach me and trying to get me to do. Because if I can't understand what you're trying to get me to do, then chances are I'm not going to learn what you're trying to get me to do because I have no idea what I'm trying to learn. So very important that we understand that. We're also observing a lot of nonverbal communication in our social interactions, social behaviors. So a lot of times we need to focus in on the nonverbals and observing them. How do you observe nonverbal communication? Well, neurotypicals are very good at reading nonverbal communication and stuff like that. And as BCBAs and RBTs, we need to get very good at reading our clients' nonverbal communication. So the client's always trying to tell us something. They might not understand what they're trying to tell us, and they might not verbally be able to tell us what they want to say, but I guarantee you they're trying to say something to us. So how do we observe that, what they're trying to say non-verbally, and how do we operationally define what they're trying to say non-verbally? That's very important soft skill to have. So yeah, operational definitions, like I said, are very important. Let's continue to define that and work on helping the whole team understand what operational definitions are. Now that's very important to me. I want to talk a little bit about interdisciplinary teams because I have been in a part of a lot of teams where I'm not a part of interdisciplinary teams. So my behavioral analyst comes from one company, my DSP comes from a different company, my psychiatrist comes from a different company, my counselor comes from an even different company. So how do we work together as a team in that situation? in a dream world for me, we would have all staffing from BCBA, RBT, DSP, psychologists, psychiatrists would all be under one roof and one umbrella and one company. So we'd all be working for an autism center. And so it's important for me that the operational definitions written by the BCBA of the behavior are very descriptive, and every single person on that team understands what the operational definition is. Because if I'm working with one person who has one interpretation of my operational definition of my behavior, and then I have to work with another person the next day who's got an entirely different interpretation of my operational definition of the operational definition of my behavior, I'm going to be confused. And when you have a confused BCBA or RBT and confused DSP, you have a confused person with autism. So that's very important. So yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a intermission now. Take about a 10-minute intermission. And then when we come back, we're going to dive into some other areas. We're going to talk about being uncomfortable in the comfortable moments. And we're going to talk about dual relationships for BCBAs and RBTs. And then finish out the day with a little bit of question and answer. So let's take a 10-minute break. And then when we come back, we'll continue the presentation. Thanks so much for watching.